like, hey, we're looking for speakers. I'm like, well, I got some content if you want it, and so we talked a little bit, but I'm originally from here, moved away, lived in Virginia for a while, came back to Utah in about 2013-ish. And I also got a car this summer. I just got a Nissan Leaf. It was my umbrella car to get out of buying gas for this summer. And so I'm pleased with that. I don't have to finance it, and we'll probably get a Tesla at some point. But we want to get this 7-seater so that we can fit everybody in it. And that's like not the base model. Like you have to like buy a bunch of upgrades. And so that's in our future, but not quite this summer. So
everybody went more fuel efficient. I went less.
But maybe you enjoy that. Maybe.
I went for my Corolla 2 and Accord. So.
But you wanted to feel the guts inside of your car. So so everyone's got something, right? I founded a company called AppCreative. I founded it in 2016, and we are a custom dev offshore partner. So we have developers, including, well, most of our developers right now are JavaScript developers, so Node, React. But we deploy those developers to clients here in the States. And how that started was I wanted to build an app in about 2017. And I thought, like, where should I build an offshore team if I wanted to build an offshore team? Well, I was married to a Russian. I still am. And I had lived there for a while, and I have a degree in Russian language and literature from BYU. And I thought, like, well, I'll build an offshore team there. No, that way I can go visit my in-laws and I can write it off of my taxes. So I built this team. We built this app, put it into beta, and other people saw that we were building apps, and they're like, hey, like one friend of mine, she said, like, you built an app. I need an app. Come talk to me. And so I showed her what I had done, and she's like, great, can you build an app for me? And I said, yeah, I guess, so completely on accident, I formed this software development company. And so then it grew over the years. We got more clients, and I was working with developers in Russia and Ukraine mostly. Then in February, all of that had to shift, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we address complexity in a chaotic environment. And that's kind of a little
much more chaotic than it is over there right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we'll talk about how chaos fits into like different types of complex systems, and hopefully you'll find something useful tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about the problem, which is like managing. I'm calling it scope. I know that's a really project managey term, but we're talking about just what it is that we're building, because complexity. In fact, I'm going to move the little preview window down here so you guys can see the slides, and I'm going to ignore that because we're trying to figure out, like, well, what are we building in our software, right? And when we have complexity in the software or in the business environment, then we have to figure out how to manage that. So the problem is that managing scope in software is hard, especially when things keep changing. And why do they keep changing? It's because of the complexity in the environment that we're working in. So we're going to cover complexity and systems theory a little bit. It's going to be super, super nerdy, but it's awesome. Just trust me. I talk about the Cynefin Framework. That's a framework by a gentleman named David Snowden. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. I'll share some examples of the different kind of quadrants, we'll call them, in that framework. Then we'll talk about maybe what you guys are experiencing. So, oh gosh, there's some noise out there. So my question is, what do you hope to take away from this session? I mean, there's 4 of us. We're in very different. How many employees are in your company?
Less than 100. We're probably closer to 50.
How big?
Guess I don't know for sure. We have 2 dev teams.
Okay.
Each dev team has about 6 developers and a designer and a QA and a team lead.
Okay.
So that's our development department, and then we have a couple managers above them as well. So those numbers I can tell you. Past that, I'm not sure.
So like 20-ish people in the IT, in the technology department.
Yeah, it's about right. Yeah.
Devs plus like analysts, designers, and managers.
Sure, you
and
got,
stuff.
yeah, we have like our ops team.
Yeah,
And
okay.
that kind of thing as well. But yeah, that's about that.
You're practicing things like continuous delivery, DevOps
yeah.
kind of stuff. Yeah, okay. Mark, how about you? How big is your IT organization? How big is your organization? And then how big is the IT organization within that?
It's about 60 people. I would say the IT teams comprise about half of that. About 30 people.
Okay, all right, cool. And then Brad's got like 3 people in the whole company. So we're looking at this from different angles. What do you want to walk away from today? Like, you saw the topic, you came here on purpose, so what's like one problem you hope to solve or that you hope to kind of hear addressed as we have this conversation? What's like one pain point or sensitive nerve that you feel around complexity or scope management?
Well, with ours, we just kind of do what the client wants, and sometimes they don't know what they want.
Okay.
They see it, so that's kind of the hard part. Is because we had one recently where they gave us, and sometimes they give us good detail, sometimes they don't. They gave us something and we put it together, and then they came back with like 10 times as many pages of changes.
Wow.
To what they originally said, and it completely changed everything. And it was just like, whoa.
Okay.
And then they expect you to keep on schedule when it was like a complete redesign of the section.
Okay, here's all this stuff. It needs to be done yesterday. Keep the schedule, but here's all the changes we want. Yeah, we'll talk.
Then there, yeah, just the changes were just like, it was just amazing.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit tonight about why prescribing those changes is not the right approach. So maybe you'll be able to take something back and talk with your other 2 guys, and you can come up with a different approach. Mark, how about you? What are you hoping to get out of this tonight?
And we deal with very complex systems and very complex data sets from people. And so being able to implement a feature while keeping it the complexity of the code down, and be able to deliver a simple product from all these complex requirements that come in.
Okay, all right. How about you, Derek?
I mean, I guess mine's kind of similar to his, where it's kind of I guess just managing expectations for upper management and that kind of thing. Like one of the things that and actually the company I'm with right now isn't as bad, but one of the issues that I've run into is, they come to you and say, we need you to do this. And we come back and say, well, we can do that. But you realize that's going to cause this to be later and this to be later.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can't do that. And, and so there's like so much give and take, and oftentimes it ends up being they kind of just say, well, just make it happen,
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay.
They have a business outcome that they want,
Right.
but how you get there, they're really looking to you to kind of fill in the blanks. Yeah.
Right.
Mark, your situation with complex data sets and things like that, I'd be interested to hear your perspective once we kind of get into this a little bit deeper. I'm curious to know, and here's the kind of the seed to plant in your mind as we're talking about this, Mark, so you can be thinking about this, is to what extent would you say that the complexity in your systems, that it creates kind of an emergent situation, meaning that like there's some kind of outcome that that emerges from the interactive parts in your system, and like do you? Anyways, so we'll come to that. I just kind of want to hear your thoughts about like, are these different parts, all these different moving parts, are they Are you having difficulty bringing them together to achieve a business outcome? And so that's my teaser question for you that we'll get into here in a little bit. Okay, so the problem is that managing software scope is a huge pain point. Keeping on top of constant changes feels almost impossible. It's a constant battle to fight a lack of organization and identify scope clearly. I have to accept, the leader, I have to accept an uncomfortable amount of risk because I know that things will change. If only there was some way to document scope and pin it down so I could hold my stakeholders accountable and keep their commitments. That's a very project managey viewpoint.
Mhm.
But to summarize, basically managing scope is hard, especially when things keep changing. A project, and I would say a software product is a system. So you have the software product itself as a system, right? You have moving parts. You have like a back end, you have a front end, you have databases and tables and things like that, or no tables. But then also the project itself, like this series of activities, right, that you engage in order to deliver something, it's also a system. By system, what do I mean exactly? So a system, here's some definitions from a couple different sources. Any group of objects that work together to produce some result. A system could also be defined as an assemblage or combination of things or parts forming a complex or unitary whole, or a cohesive conglomeration of interrelated and interdependent parts, which can be natural or human-made. So I'm going to cover 4 different types of systems because I think it's important as a backdrop for identifying what complexity really is. We have simple systems. These are systems that have few parts or components, and they're pretty understandable. They have predictable outcomes, and there's a pretty clear cause and effect. And there's basically one path to one right answer. I'll give some examples of these different types of systems here in a little bit. There are complicated systems where we've got multiple paths to multiple right answers. And so there's a pretty clear cause and effect, but not everyone can see that. Usually you have to be like an expert to understand, like, why is this system behaving the way that it is? You have complex systems where we've got cooperative interactions of the individual components, and they determine emergent functionalities. And by emergent, I mean things that are not necessarily part of like a preconceived design. They're not part of a prescription. But they arise out of the interaction between these systems. Kind of like the whole is more than the sum of its parts, if you will. And it's a little bit, it's unpredictable, so you can't really tell in advance what's going to happen. And then you also have chaos, which is no predictability and it's only turbulence. Cause and effect shift constantly with no patterns. War would be an example also of chaos. So, and there's this guy named Dave Snowden. Has anybody heard of Dave Snowden before?
The name sounds familiar, but
Are you guys agilists?
yeah.
So you're practicing agile in your company?
I'm the scrum master of my team. Actually.
You're the scrum master. Okay, great. And how about you, Mark? Are you in a leadership role?
I'm a senior software engineer.
Okay. So are you practicing agile or scrum or something? Like how are you guys managing your work?
Yep, we use Agile.
Okay. So Dave Snowden he was kind of this agile guru, like this chief agilist, thought leader. Now I think he is having a lot of turbulence between him and the agilists because he's kind of coming back around and saying like, hey, you know what, I'm moving on. I don't like agile anymore. So like one of the guys that's like, agile is dead because of these reasons. And all the agilists are like, blasphemy. How dare you say something like that, Anyway, but this framework that he put together is called the Cynefin Framework, and it's a Welsh word that means habitat, haunt, acquainted, familiar. It signifies the multiple factors in our environment and our experience that influence us in ways we can never understand. So basically what he's done is he's taken these 4 different types of systems and he's said like, okay, these aren't quadrants per se. That's why the lines are kind of squiggly, okay? But these are different conditions in which we live, in which we code, in which we operate our businesses. So we can be in a simple system or a complicated system or complex system, or we can be in chaos. And there's kind of this like boundary of disorder in between them all, right? And so if you're going to move from one domain to another, you have to pass through a certain amount of disorder, which I think should be actually encouraging because I think people expect that we're not going to have any disorder. But if we're innovating and growing as a business or as a technology organization, we're going to we're going to have to pass through disorder in order to get to a greater sense of order. Okay, so we got this framework here. Let's talk about some examples of these systems, of these different levels of complexity. So we talked about the simple system. We said that it was like, simple parts that interact with each other in predictable ways. There's kind of like one path through the system. So like a loan payment processing app would be an example of a simple system, right? Like, you supposed to pay by a certain date. If you don't pay by a certain date, then you get put in this queue, and then this happens. If you do pay on time, then you advance to this status. And basically every month you're going through this system and getting to the end of it, right? So this is this payment processing. It's pretty predictable. And with simple systems, we have best practices, right? Like the best thing to do when operating a loan payment processing system is to do this and this and this. We have a lot of experience with this. It's predictable. We know kind of how these parts interact with each other. So therefore, the best practice is to do these things. It's a best practice. Then you get into complicated systems. A complicated system is kind of like a Ferrari, right? It's a complicated machine. There's a lot of different parts. But if you were an expert engineer working at the Ferrari factory, you would know the ins and outs of this. A Boeing 737 could be another example, right? So it's a complicated machine, but an expert can disassemble and reassemble with no change, and that's key. You can reassemble it and it'll still work because there is still some predictability. There's multiple paths through the system, but multiple correct paths through the system, but you could reassemble it. Okay, now there's a complex system. Oh, sorry. With a complicated system, we move from best practices to good practices. Like generally, it's a good thing to do this. You should oil your Ferrari every so often. Is that a hard and fast rule? Not necessarily, but it's wise. Maybe you want to do it more, maybe less. It really depends on you. If you look at the complex system, a complex system is like the Brazilian rainforest. Right? We've got constant flux. We've got species becoming extinct. We've got weather patterns changing. We've got agriculture rerouting water in different channels. So one thing changes, and then it kind of like pushes something else over the tipping point, and then that thing changes, and there's kind of this chain reaction. But over time, these things interact with each other, and then there's some kind of result that you can't really predict. But there is the opportunity for something to emerge from that. It could be something good, it could be something bad, but basically there's going to be something that will come out of those interactions. So we're going to talk about emergent practices here in a little bit. Chaos, we're talking about like war, we're talking about a situation where you really don't know how to predict what's happening in any way. And so, because if you go back to the Brazilian rainforest, you could say like, well, if we continue chopping down these trees at this rate, then it's going to affect the level of carbon dioxide or oxygen, in a certain way. And so you can kind of maybe do some projections or some analyses, but with chaos, that's not possible. With chaos, we call this a novel practice because you have to take action and then see what the effect is. And the goal in chaos is you're trying to take action so that you can restore certain pain points back to complexity rather than chaos, right? So we're trying to restore order, maybe not even in a holistically right away, but at least in parts. I'll tell you my Ukraine war story here a little bit later, but okay. So with these four different domains, if you will, right? Snowden has these kind of ways to behave described here, right? So in the simple system, you sense, you categorize, you respond, and so with the simple system, you basically can just say like, okay, well, we want people's payments to go through, so let's think of all the things that need to happen in order to deliver that payment processing system. So you categorize all those activities. And then if something goes wrong, you can respond to those things that go wrong. That's a great project management, waterfall project management, right? If you have risks, you document the risks, and then you can respond to those risks as they arise. With a complicated system, again, a waterfall project management can be a good practice. You sense, you analyze, you respond. Well, what happens if we do this? Okay, we've analyzed that. Okay, and what happens if we open up the throttle to this much, or what happens if we put this much pressure on the brakes? Then we kind of know what happens. And so a lot of engineering practices can fit into that complicated system area. But with a complex system, you have to probe, sense, and then respond. So there has to be kind of like this gathering of information first, rather than the predicting of what's going to happen. And with chaos, you don't even probe, you just act, because there's nothing that you can't just gather information about what's going on, because it's not predictable. So, all right, you guys have seen this scene from Apollo 13, where they're doing the filters, right?
We have a situation growing with the carbon dioxide. We had a CO2 filter problem on the LIM module. 5 filters on the LIM, which were meant for 2 guys for a day and a half. So I told the doc,
They're already up to 8 on the gauges. Anything over 15, and you get impaired judgment, blackouts, the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
they take square cartridges. The ones on the LIM are round.
I mean, this isn't a government operation.
This just isn't a contingency we've remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we got to come through. We got to find a way to make this fit into the hole for this. Using nothing but that. Let's get it organized.
Okay, let's build a filter.
We going too.
I know, isn't that classic? I love it too. Full screen for some reason. Okay, so this is a complicated system, a complicated scenario. And the reason why is because we've got an outcome that we're trying to achieve, but we have to figure out how to make it. Well, we have a bunch of parts, and we have to figure out how to make those parts into a whole that will achieve a certain outcome. One of the articles that Snowden co-authored here, most situations and decisions in organizations are complex because some major change, a bad quarter, a shift in management, a merger or acquisition, introduces unpredictability and flux. In this domain, meaning complexity, we can understand why things happen only in retrospect. Instructive patterns, however, can emerge if the leader conducts experiments that are safe to fail. That is why, instead of attempting to impose a course of action, leaders must patiently allow the path forward to reveal itself. They need to probe first, then sense, and then respond. Okay, so let's talk about the French HR systems client, right? So they're saying, here's this thing that we're telling you to build. So you go build that thing. And then you go build that thing, and then it's not the right thing, right? Or they come to you and they say, we need this out. Are they coming to you, Derek, and saying, we need this outcome, or are we saying we need you to build this? Like, are they prescribing what it is that they want you to build?
I mean, depends on the situation, but yeah, a lot of times they're saying what it is they want us to build.
So they've decided what it is, and then you're supposed to build it, and then you're kind of just going to hope that it will achieve the business outcome. And
Right.
The frustrating thing with that is that how will they know? Like, let's step back and look at the conditions that we're in, right? Are we in a simple system, a complicated system, a complex system, or chaos? I would suggest that, and I'm jumping around here a little bit, that software in general is a complex system, because you've got I propose that managing software is an emergent experience based on reciprocity between users and product designers. So you could look at that in terms of business users. You can also look at it in terms of just actual users. Like, there's like 7,000 people working with this French client, right? 70,000, excuse me. Yeah, 70,000 people. And so you got all these different brains that are interacting with your software. Then you got the designers that are trying to design software for 70,000 different brains.
Then to make it worse, it's like in 20 different languages.
Yeah, okay. So how do those languages interact with the user experience, the user interface? So there's also this second proposal, and that is managing the business environment is also an emergent experience based upon the interplay of people and performance. So you've got your 70,000 users and you got your product designers. So there's this interplay of like, well, how will so many percentage of the 70,000 users' brains interact with this user interface? Will it be clear enough, intuitive enough? But then you also say like, well, how much value will this product add to that 70,000 user French client? And what if they have a bad quarter? Or what if they have a great quarter? Then are they going to need more stuff from us? So the interaction between users and product people, that is already a complex system. And then it's kind of nested in this larger complex system, and that is the business environment in which we are trying to build software. So recognizing that software is not a simple system, software is not a complicated system. It is more of a complex system just purely because of the environment that it's in and because of the way that users interact with products. Now you could say the product itself is actually simple, like that, the mortgage payment processor. That in and of itself is a simple system, but it's in a complex environment.
Right.
So we have to be careful with like, okay, what are we literally calling complex versus complicated, et cetera. But I think that just the fact that we're trying to build software that's going to run out in the wild means that we cannot treat it like we're just building a simple system. We can't just prescribe what's going to happen, because when we do, it fails, right? And people come back and say, well, here are all the 10 pages of changes. And the reason for that is not because the stakeholders are just annoying, it's because they are trying to navigate in a complex domain,
Right.
using rules from either a simple domain or a
There's
complicated
things that they
domain.
don't think about until they
Yeah.
go and do it. And even that happens to me, because they'll say, oh, we want this. Now I'm like, all right, that's easy. And then I start doing that. I'm like, well, what about this? What about that?
Yeah,
What about this?
Yeah. And so then we get frustrated if we're Scrum Masters, or if we are developers, or if we are project managers, because we want someone somewhere to just like put the magic touch on this initiative so that there will be no change,
Right.
so that there will be clarity of what the client wants, so that we don't have to keep like spinning our wheels and building the wrong stuff. And so if anything, I hope that you can walk away from this tonight just having some compassion for yourself, that the reason why they're coming and asking for these changes, the reason why this is so frustrating, it's not because they're trying to make life difficult and they always want more. It's because perhaps it's because we're trying to apply a set of rules of engagement that normally would work well in a simple system or a complicated system. We're trying to apply those in a complex system, and it doesn't work because we're trying to prescribe stuff. And in a complex system, you can't do that because it's not predictable.
Right.
Is this starting to make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah. Mark, are you following us?
Yeah, this makes sense. This is good.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really almost unfair, right, to expect people in this complex world of software development to really achieve a business outcome when they're trying to apply behaviors that really belong in another domain. We're trying to categorize stuff and predict stuff and prescribe stuff, and we really need to be like figuring out how we can achieve a specific outcome with the moving parts that we have. Okay, so all right, that's complexity. Really quickly about chaos before we kind of dive into what to do about all this stuff. So I think I mentioned earlier that my company started off with developers in Russia, and then we added developers in Ukraine. And so we had these Russians and Ukrainians that were working well side by side. And then all hell breaks loose and there's this invasion. And I remember driving home kind of late the evening on the 23rd of February or 24th of February, and just realizing like this is happening like right now and what's going to happen next. So the next 3 weeks or so, I spent, I'm not telling you this so that you'll take pity on me, but it just kind of to paint the picture. So my Russian wife left to pick up her mom in Istanbul. So we had to get my Russian mother-in-law out of Russia. And there's a whole long back history and what happened with that. Basically, my wife was not with me. I have 4 kids. And then I have this business where I thought, okay, question number 1, are all the Ukrainians safe? Are all of my Ukrainians safe? Okay, Eric, where are you? Hey, Dmitry, where are you? Okay, second, are we going to lose the ability to pay our Russians? Like, are we going to lose access to our Russian developers because of sanctions? So that's question number 2. Third, what's the morality of continuing to work with these Russian developers, and what does that mean for the future of our company? And then fourth, even if we retain all the Russians and all the Ukrainians, are they going to be able to work together in the future? So how will that affect our team dynamics? And so in that case, fortunately, I remembered this material about chaos, because that's really what it felt like. And so that maybe helped me to be a little bit compassionate toward myself, just to say like, okay, it's March the 1st. What's going to happen? I got to like listen to the news. I got to figure out what to do. But with chaos, you can't just like try to predict. You have to take action. So what I did was I just shot a quick little video in my office, just saying like, hey, if you are a developer that knows JavaScript and you are, if you've just left Russia and moved to Georgia, and we want to talk to you. So click here and submit your resume to us, and we can talk and just see if we can work together, right? Because I thought like, well, if I hire more Ukrainians, what will that do to our team dynamics? Will they be willing to work with the Russians that we have? Do I have to fire the Russians? I probably shouldn't. And in terms of the question number 3, the morality question, like we probably shouldn't be recruiting more Russian developers. This is not like, it doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do right now. So let's just put that recruiting on hold. We'll stop recruiting. So what I did was we stopped recruiting from Russia and Ukraine altogether. And we ran this video ad on YouTube in the Russian language in the Republic of Georgia. And we had so we ran it for a week in Georgia and a week in Turkey. And we had about 280 respondents. So like developers that were like submitting resumes and stuff. And, like maybe it was like 5 or 6 people that were just like, why are you recruiting Russians in my country? Go to hell, get out of here, whatever. But you kind of just delete those and move on. But trying to take a specific chunk of all of this chaos that's going on and just acting first, and then sensing what's happening and then responding. So trying to take that and kind of restore order to at least a portion of the chaos that we're experiencing. So we're not here to talk about chaos, but that's just my illustrative experience with the chaos as a domain in the Cynefin framework. So fortunately, we actually did hire a bunch of awesome software developers in Georgia, and they're great. And I've really enjoyed working with them. So
your Ukrainian and Russians you don't work with them anymore?
I retained some of some of my Russians left Russia and they went to Georgia.
Okay.
Some of them decided to stay in Russia, and it's getting harder and harder to pay them because the bank is still now, because the Russian banks, even the private banks, well, we had to shift everyone's banking to like the private banks that were not under sanctions. That was the first thing we had to do. The platform that we were using to pay everybody like totally shut down and walked away from Russia. Like, we're not doing business in Russia. So you have to like basically end these contracts. So we had to transition some people to like sole proprietorships. Is this interesting? I don't know,
Yeah.
So we had to transition some of these people to sole proprietorships. They had to get their bank accounts and their entity set up and all that stuff. And so the people that we really needed to hold on to in Russia, we were able to hold on to. We let some people go. With the Ukrainians, one guy who was in Kiev, he was like trying to get out of the country. It was going to be like a 6-hour drive. I was trying to stay in touch with him as he was moving across the country whenever he had connectivity. And by the time he got to the border, my other developer had told me they closed the border. So I knew that he wasn't going to be able to get through, but I just thought, like, what's going to happen next? But they all ended up being safe. So one of those guys is still working with us, and he's in Zaporizhia, right next to that atomic power plant that's like under attack right now. And anyway, so, but he still shows up and he still works, and it just inspires awe in me of how amazing he is that he's still just like able to stay engaged and focused on his work. But okay, so I don't want to prescribe to you that your specific products are complex systems, but which domain are you in? If you're trying to understand, like, well, which domain am I in? So what should be the approach I should use to manage complexity? I would say first ask yourself, well, is there a clear connection between cause and effect? Is your industry pretty predictable? Maybe in the HR space it is, I don't know, but we've already kind of talked about how, users' brains and business environment already kind of adds a lot of complexity to our software experience. Do you have to be an expert to analyze your system correctly? And are there emergent patterns of use? Is this more than the sum of its parts? Okay, so with the complex domain, what we want to do is we want to identify business outcomes, and then we want to conduct safe fail experiments with fast feedback loops, which is why Agile was created in the first place, right? We wanted to do, like, the whole point of Agile was to say, we're going to build a small chunk of value and we're going to release that right away so that we can see if that value is realized in the market.
Yeah.
So we have that experiment, we release that feature, and then the scope depends upon the use cases that emerge. We're not in project management anymore, which then suddenly explains this like big fight that we've been having in the management space, right? Like, waterfall is really the best because of these reasons. Agile is the only true way to build software and to build value, and that all the project management practitioners are evil. All the Agilists are evil, and here's the reason why, And so, but if we can recognize that we're operating in totally different domains, and suddenly we can see that there's a place for everything, which is appropriate. Because in a complicated system, you can gather requirements and you can analyze those requirements interdependence with each other. And you can document scope. And in a simple system also, you can gather requirements and categorize them simply and then just document stuff. But that's not what works in complexity. Okay, so we're shifting our emphasis from outputs to outcomes. So now let's go back to the French HR customer. The outcome is what? Can you give me an example of like an outcome that they were trying to achieve with a recent request?
Okay, so they wanted 360-degree surveys.
Okay.
The way they did it originally is only the manager could do it.
Okay.
And then they changed it where they wanted the user to be able to start a 360, put in the people they want to do, and then send it to the manager.
Okay, so wait, so the manager was previously supposed to prescribe who was going to provide the 360 feedback.
Yeah, the
Okay.
only, like, if I'm the employee, you're the manager,
Mhm.
you would set it all up. The only thing you'd ever give me was the final report of what happened.
Mhm.
I wouldn't not even know who was in it.
Yeah, okay.
And now they want me to set it up, and then you approve it. You can add or delete people and then send it out. And then I get the report.
But they came to you saying, we want 360-degree feedback, so go build this.
Right.
And then
so the problem is they said, okay, just once a year, just do it once a year. Right. And so the way we designed it is if I go in and I create my participant list and I send it to you, then I'm done. If I go do it again, it says, oh, you've already done it.
Mhm.
They came back and said, no, that's not what we want. We want them to be able to do multiple, but they can't do the next one until the first one has been submitted to the manager approves it and launches it, and then it's been completed for 30 days, then they can start a new one. See, so that they added a lot more complexity to the way that it works, because before all I had to do is check, well, did they do one this year? Yeah, okay, you're done. Now you have to say, well, did they do one this year? Has it been launched? has it been completed and has it been 30 days? Okay, now you can create a new one.
Okay.
So now all of a sudden there's a bunch of different statuses of your 360. And then to make it even more complex, depending on what where you are in the company, they have different grades. If you're like, and I don't know where it is, like upper management, say manager and above, you can create your own and launch it. You don't have to have the manager approve it.
And that was all part of the changes that came back on.
Yeah.
How much time elapsed from when you built 360 the first time and when they came back asking you for the changes?
It was like a month and a half. But the thing was, they kept saying, where is it? Where is it? And we did it. And then they took a month before they even looked at it. Then they looked at it.
Oh,
And then
okay.
they came back and said this.
Okay.
And then they wanted to launch it within a month.
Mhm.
So.
So when they did look at it, did they try to use it or was it just like, oh, we can immediately tell that this is,
Well, they didn't really tell us what, they just kind of came back and said, oh, this is what we don't like.
so you don't really know what kind of activities happen within the company or within the, yeah.
Because
okay.
so we have a test system on our side. They actually host it, which makes it even more complex. So we have a test system on our side where we, kind of develop and we put it down and they look at it. And then we have and that's where they did it. They did it on our side.
Uh-huh.
And then once they're okay with that, then we move it to their test system. And then they test it, just make sure everything was moved over correctly. Because sometimes moving it from one place to another, some things get forgotten.
So what was going through your head?
I was
When
not happy.
You were not happy. Probably because you were thinking, well, you should have just said this in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I was thinking is it'd have been nice to have this detail the first time.
Yeah. Mhm.
And yeah.
I think that's where it's challenging because you have to discern between like, could someone have prescribed this? Could someone have like thought through and designed this in the first place and then come,
Yes.
as opposed to like, I guess what I'm saying is like that is not necessarily an example of emergent functionality, right? That truly is an example of like, hey, we probably could predict that more than just like waiting to see what
Right.
happens.
And maybe they didn't give us that much detail because we already had the 360
Uh-huh.
system in there.
Yeah.
So maybe and I don't know, maybe they didn't think through it, but we did ask questions. And the way that they work is really kind of strange because we have a project manager and he's basically just a go-between.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
like he talks to the people who design it and then he just passes information. I mean, we thought he was gonna be more of a, like, he knows nothing, well, he knows very little about the system works. And we thought he would be more involved in helping get the requirements, because that's kind of what he's talking about him doing, but no, he doesn't do that. He just basically, somebody sends him, this is the requirement, he sends it on. And then we ask questions and then we did get a meeting with, the true client, which helped. That was interesting because we were mad and they were mad.
Was there ever a conversation about like, why do you want 360 to work this way?
Well, that's beyond, that's more the CEO, he's more an expert of,
Your CEO,
Yeah.
not theirs, yours.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So he's more the expert in the way, why do you want to do it this way? And you know what I mean? I kind of just do what they say.
Uh-huh.
Like I've done it before, but he's more of, well, really, why do you want to do it this way? And this would be better. But, sometimes he can convince them and other times, they're just, depending on the people, they're just set and maybe they read it somewhere. They say this is what we want, and so sometimes he has more influence. I don't know, it's just kind of this, but when we can't talk to him directly, and I don't know what meetings he's in without me, but the VP that, we've kind of worked with the past, we have to kind of go through people now to get to her. And I don't know if he's talked to her, so I just don't know how.
So maybe there's an opportunity
Yeah,
for you, for your company to go back to the French client to say, what's the actual business outcome that you want to achieve by doing this? And then focus on that specific outcome. Okay, how can we do we even need, is 360 the way to even accomplish this?
Right.
Maybe it's going to have a negative impact or the reverse effect that we want. So if you can think of it as like, okay, this is one moving piece in this Brazilian rainforest of 70,000 people. What's the outcome that we really want? Well, we want people to feel like they are informed about where they can grow. And we want them to feel like the company cares about them as an employee.
Mhm.
So
And if you think about, depending on where you work or what group you're in, if they're really involved in the 360, you could get, 10, 20 requests to fill out surveys on people.
oh yeah,
And it's like, depending on who you are, some people just like, I'm not doing that.
that happened to us actually. We had 360-degree feedback in a company I worked in, like right out of college. I think it was like 2007. And so, and then every year, you had to write like 10 different reviews on other people, and it was not that fun. But
Yeah, exactly.
so let me give an example of true emergent functionality that comes out of a complex system. So YouTube was created to play videos. But the founders of YouTube could not possibly have predicted all the applications for streaming video. So because what happened is that they saw, well, now people are using YouTube to play music. People are using YouTube to teach courses. People are using YouTube to do this and this and this. And so YouTube became a complex system, right? It wasn't just like play the video, you're done. It's like, well, all these people now in the Brazilian rainforest are trying to use this product in new ways. How can we support those new ways? And so then in order to manage that complexity, and maybe Mark, this is what can help you a little bit with all of the different data systems and the different the data structures and things. Like, we've seen how people engage with our product, the YouTube product. Now let's take this chunk of that use case and let's create a separate product for just YouTube music. Let's create a separate product over here for YouTube learning or whatever that is, or YouTube kids, so people are, so basically the way that people are interacting with the product now shines light on where the value is. And then we're building software to support where the value is, rather than having someone trying to predict it and prescribe what's supposed to happen next. So how are people using this 360-degree tool? Where's the value? And maybe we can make suggestions, or we can engage the French customer with in a conversation about like how we can achieve better business outcomes and support them as their HR technology vendor.
Right.
So that's my.
We'll find out who's launched today.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Mark, do you want to share a use case or kind of what you're dealing with, and then we can see if there's any overlap with our framework for complexity?
Yeah, I think especially with ours, like analytics has been a big part of, we analyze, get all these different security scanners, and they provide different data points. Sorry. Aggregating, but then a customer come back and say, hey, you want to report on this? Often it's like, we want to report on this. We want to have some sort of workflow that triggers based off this. So we have to be responsive to those different requirements as they come in.
Is there like a reporting product that you've built out of this that has arisen out of this need that the users have?
Yeah, there is. There's been reporting and APIs as well that have been opened up and developed because of those needs.
I think that sounds like a great application of our model for acting in a complex environment, right? Which is, let me go back just to reemphasize this. Or probing, sensing, and responding. Okay, so how are people using this security software? Oh, we just lost the TV screen. Oh, there it's back. It's back. You're back. Oh,
Or not.
I think maybe we just have a bad connection. Oh, maybe this isn't in all the way.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's interesting.
We have a short in our cable, Mark, and so you are now no, you were psychedelic and green, but now you're.
It shows up clear for me.
Yeah,
Well, there you go.
there we go.
Oh,
Or not. Probing, sensing, and responding. Okay, what's the need? I'm just gonna disconnect
Here,
this.
just disconnect it here.
Yeah. Acquiring, we're gathering feedback from our users. We are sensing that they have a need for reporting, and then we're responding by creating a reporting product or some open APIs that people can pull their own reports from. That would be a great example of how to deal with the complexity of all these different moving parts. So maybe another question for Mark would be like, what's the next problem that you want to address? You talked about how it was hard to manage all these different moving parts. So like, what's something that's on your horizon, coming up on the horizon that you think like, gosh, that's going to be really hard to work through?
One problem we have to address at some point is that we have so many different connections to the different security scanners. Is normalizing that data. We always come into problems of, we got this connector has this type, this since a connector like this security scan has this feature. The customer wants to be able to see that, but how do we interpret that with all the other different scanners with their data? And so identifying and figuring out how to interpret the data is a big hurdle as we go and add more and more different scanners.
Maybe there's an opportunity to kind of probe or extract information from these different users of different scanners to kind of identify common trends and to see, like, are people trying to use the scanners, or are they trying to use your endpoints in ways that maybe weren't intended, but that actually add value for them? And then if so, maybe we should be going in that direction rather than trying to prescribe or to architect what's going to happen next. Like maybe we need to do more observing, more probing and sensing first before we respond. So if you look at it though, the difference between a simple system and a complex system, sense, categorize, respond, probe, sense, respond, it doesn't sound like they're that different, but one is prescriptive and one is emergent, if that makes sense. So I think maybe just being open to learning what we should be building based upon how people are trying to use our product in maybe ways that we didn't understand, rather than trying to prescribe how people should use our product. So, okay, let's see how we're doing for time. It's 8:20. We need to wrap up. I think I could share. I was kind of prepared with like way too much content, so I kind of just pick what fits well into the conversation. But managing software is an emergent experience based upon reciprocity between users and product designers. We talked about that. We also talked about how managing the business environment is also an emergent experience. And what we wanted, people are so obsessed with trying to control everything. They want to minimize change. They want to avoid, like in the project management world, right? They're trying to like avoid having to change the scope and the schedule and the budget and all that stuff, trying to maintain morale and manage resource capacity. But what we should be saying is we have this glorious opportunity to build products that are more than the sum of our parts. We're trying to like observe how people want to use our products and then to build that. And you have to have a lot of data and a lot of interplay between the moving parts in order to understand what that is. So how can you develop your ability to deliver value if you're applying the wrong method for the domain you're in? If you're in a setting where there's emergent value, then don't try to project manage it. You need to build small chunks of value and see how well they work. Okay, I think we can probably go ahead and wrap up there. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Probably not. I think we're about out of time. And okay, so here are my takeaways. You need to know what domain you're in. If you really are in a simple or a complicated domain rather than a complex one, then that project management is fine. If you're building a Ferrari, great. But if you're working in a complex domain, you need to shift from categorizing, analyzing, and documenting to probing, experimentation, and responding. So you need to focus on outcomes, not outputs. And scope management may be the entirely wrong label of what it is that you need to do. It's more about experimentation than it is about management. So we want to assess the complexity of our projects and our environment. We want to listen to our stakeholders and figure out where the value gap is. We want to fill that gap. Rather than expecting everyone else to tell us what to do, we want to do things that will meet the business need, which is very different. And I think that's about it. So my contact information is here. I hope we'll all connect on LinkedIn, and let me know if I can send anybody your way for your PHP user group. This is how big was the group before the pandemic? Did you have like a lot of people before?
We would get 15-ish, 15 upwards of 20, depending on the month.
I mean, I can remember, this was way before the pandemic, but I can remember having upwards of 30, 40 people.
Oh, wow.
We've been a pretty large group at times.
How many users are actually in the meetup group itself?
Oh,
hundreds.
that's not a very good measure because like I get emails, and actually I'm not getting them as much as I used to, but